Evening, everyone. Welcome to Atlanta History Center's virtual author talk series. My name is Claire Haley. I'm the Media Communications Director and the coordinator of the Author Talk series here for the History Center. And I am so excited to be welcoming all of you here tonight virtually. We will be featuring author Patti Callahan, discussing her newest book, Surviving Savannah, which officially gets published tomorrow. So this is a preview event. We're so excited for her to launch with us tonight. She will be in conversation with fellow author and good friend, Paula McLain. The book is available for purchase from tonight's official bookseller, which is Foxtail Bookshop, located up in Woodstock. I will be posting a link in the chat that you can use to purchase it, or you can find that link on Atlanta History Center's website. If you have questions for Patti and Paula this evening as their conversation progresses, you can use the Q&A to submit those. There's a lot of you here this evening, so they're going to try and get to as many as they can, and they will do that at the end of their conversation. So now I will introduce tonight's featured author, Patti Callahan. So Patti actually launched her very first book at the Margaret Mitchell House at Atlanta History Center back in 2004. So we are overjoyed to have her back here tonight for her newest book. She needs very little introduction, but she is a New York Times bestselling author and USA Today bestselling author of 15 novels, including Becoming Mrs. Lewis, which she also did a program for at the Margaret Mitchell House. And of course, her newest book you'll be hearing about tonight, Surviving Savannah. She's a recipient of the Christie Award, a 2019 winner Book of the Year, the Harper Lee Distinguished Writer of the Year for 2020, and the Alabama Library Association Book of the Year for 2019, among many other accolades. She is an extremely active speaker and is frequently a guest at book clubs, luncheons, and women's organizations, and of course, author events like we're lucky to have tonight. We are so fortunate to be hosting her for the 7th time this evening. And of course, as I mentioned, her book will officially be on sale tomorrow. And she is in conversation with fellow author Paula McLain. Paula is a New York Times bestselling author of several novels, including Love and Ruin, Circling the Sun, and The Paris Wife, the memoir Like Family, Growing Up in Other People's Houses, and 2 collections of poetry. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Good Housekeeping, O Magazine, Town and Country, The Guardian, The Huffington Post, and elsewhere. And she also has a new book coming out soon, so keep an eye out for it. I think there's a sneak peek of it right there. So that's When the Stars Go Dark, and it's on sale April 13th. So thank you both so much for being here tonight, and I'm now going to turn it over to Patti and Paula.
Thank you, Claire, and congratulations, Patti.
Thank you.
Tomorrow's the big day. So we've been friends now for, I don't know, do you know the number?
Oh, no, a lifetime?
Sometimes I feel like we're married.
Yes, same brain.
Yes. But, and I've told this story before, probably even here at the Atlanta History Center, but we met at a crazy event in Texas and became instant friends. And then kind of got drunk together in a hotel room and started singing show tunes.
Yes, My Fair Lady.
My Fair Lady, exactly. But that night was the night that you told me that you had the idea for Mrs. Lewis, which was your first historical, which we'll get to later. But I just always feel like our friendship is lovely, but it also just felt, I don't know, that it came along at the right time for both of us, that it was really auspicious. And
it was very destined.
Yes. And I couldn't be more proud of you and more excited to talk about this lovely book. So for those of you who weren't lucky enough to get an early copy, I'm sure most everyone here would love to hear just sort of the down and dirty synopsis of the book. What is Surviving Savannah?
And thank you. I remember seeing you in that room, and I remember walking up and introducing myself to tell you how much I loved The Paris Wife. And we were at that crazy thing in Texas, and I was with Christy Whitson Harvey, Mary Alice Monroe, and Laura Lane McNeil, and you said, "Am I cool enough to join the 3 named Southern ladies?"
I think I called you the 3 named Southern Lady Mafia.
That's exactly what it was. I was like, actually, you're too cool to join the 3 named Southern Lady Mafia. Okay, Surviving Savannah. It is the story of a long lost story, an untold story of a shipwreck that happened in 1838. There was a steamship called the Pulaski, which it now has a new nickname, which nobody wants their ship to get this nickname, but it is the Titanic of the South. And this beautiful, elegant steamship would take the well-to-do of Savannah and Charleston north for the summer and get them out of the hot, steamy summers. And this was the fourth journey. And I'd heard about the ship and I'd thought about writing about it, put it off, came back, put it off, came back. And I finally decided I wanted to do some research into it because it really affected the area that I love and where I am right now, Bluffton and Savannah. And I was 3 weeks in to my research when they found it at the bottom of the ocean. So what this story, the shipwreck hunters did, and we'll probably talk more about that later, but what this story is about is a dual timeline, because once I found out that they found the ship, I knew there had to be a modern day story with a museum curator bringing up the things from the bottom of the ocean. So we have a modern day museum curator who is bringing up the artifacts. And then we travel on this ship with 2 women. And I think this is so amazing, Paula, that we're doing this on Women's History Day.
Yeah.
Because both of us, right, tell from women's point of view. And every shipwreck book I've ever read has been told from the captain's point of view or the first mate's point of view. And so you meet 2 women, and women are, concerned about different things than men when a ship's going down, like their children and their nieces and their nephews and their families.
And other people.
And other people, exactly. And so that we follow 2 women as they're trying to save their own lives and the lives of their families and the people around them while learning more about it from the modern day storyline.
Right. So we're both big believers in that kind of what feels like magic and like perfect synchronicity when there seems to be a sign from the universe that this is the story to tell right now. Because of course we have ideas all the time, and why this and not this and why this. So was it that kind of big wet kiss from the universe that you were on the right track?
It very much was, because I was only pondering it, right? I was doing my research. I was trying to figure out if it was something I wanted to do. I had some other ideas, and I was talking to you like we do about all of the ideas.
Right.
Like, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? I mean, you and I both believe that certain stories want to be told. They want to be told. And that sounds kind of crazy, but they do. You felt that way with The Paris Wife. You felt that way with Circling the Sun. You felt that way with Love. They wanted to be told. So when I was researching it and I found out they had found it, I was like, you know what? Because I had the person who told me about this story told me about it 3 or 4 times. And all 3 or 4 times he told me about it, even printing newspaper articles and giving them to me, I had no interest.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally I have some interest, and then they find it.
Mm-hmm.
So all that, while I'm trying to bring up the lost stories of the passengers, they're over there bringing up the lost treasure and artifacts.
Right.
We're doing this at the same time and don't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then those 2 melded, and I just got that story chill bump on the back of my neck, down my arm.
Spidey sense.
Spidey
sense. It's so fascinating to me too. I mean, I'm sure this happens to you all the time, but once I wrote The Paris Wife, I never did an event without somebody standing up and saying, have you ever heard about so-and-so? Or you should write about so-and-so. Or they would leave me little Post-it notes. And of course, every single idea was interesting, and some quite interesting, but there also needs to be another level of, maybe it's magic. I'm not sure what it is, but it feels like you have no other choice, right? You have no other choice except to write the story in front of you, which seems to have a will of its own.
And it's so funny, Paula, not only that, but you can ignore it at your own peril. Right? So, you can feel it if we're paying attention, like we're putting up our little antennae and paying attention. It at your own peril, meaning then you start trying to write something that either isn't ready yet, or isn't the story that that you should be writing because it's not of you or from you. And you start to try and force something else. And we've all done it. We've all wasted, no time is wasted. No writing is wasted. But
But
we
you
have
can
all,
feel the difference.
yes.
You can feel the difference when you're not writing from that place of total, I always think it's like falling in love, right? It's just total obsession and you can't think about anything else. And it wakes you up in the middle of the night and you get in the shower and it starts talking to you. And I mean, that's the best, right?
It just doesn't feel forced. It doesn't mean it's easy. I mean, this was a really, really hard book to write. I almost gave up on it 3 times. In fact, one of the times you pulled me off the ledge.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're
We
welcome.
are here today, everyone, because Paula McLain snatched me by the hair and pulled me off a ledge. So
Yeah. So we have the real Pulaski, which is fascinating enough. And I'm sure that, you know, the way research is, it probably sent you down 400 different rabbit holes, you know, as you learned much more and more and more about the actual event. So how closely did you adhere to the real tragedy of the Pulaski, the real story?
So unlike Becoming Mrs. Lewis, which is biographical, so I stuck to the facts of her life.
Right.
For this one, I considered the ship the biography. The Pulaski has its biography. So the people we follow on the ship are inspired by very real people. And I do use some real people's names like Captain Dubois and First Mate Hibbard because I want to honor them. So they all have their real names. But the 2 main characters, Lily and Augusta, are based on and inspired by a real family, but I did not stick exactly to the biography. But for the ship, I stuck exactly to its biography. It left at 8 a.m. on July 13th. The passengers paid $35 a piece to come on board. They sailed up the Savannah River, down past Tybee Island. They docked in Charleston. Those passengers paid $30 a ticket. They boarded. They sailed all day and all night. At 11:04 p.m., the starboard boiler emptied, and the first engineer poured cold water into a boiling hot copper boiler and created a bomb. The ship exploded, broke in half, took 45 minutes to sink. All of that is exactly biographical of the ship's history.
Wow.
I know.
Exciting. So I just totally forgot my question.
You got so excited about the ship.
No, I actually did get really excited about it. How safe was steamship travel at that time? Like, did this kind of thing happen very often? Did they know that it could happen? Or was it more like, you know, when we see the Titanic, for instance, you know, they board so blithely thinking they're on the safest possible.
The unsinkable ship.
The
right?
unsinkable ship. Is it like that?
No. And that is one of the crazy parts of the story is that steamship was not yet safe, but it was safer than their alternatives. So trains did not go all the way through yet. They were trying to get north. So they would have to travel by horse and buggy, and it could be really dangerous. Okay. So the reason everybody felt safe on this ship was this super false sense of security in this. It guaranteed only 1 night at sea. So you weren't rolling the dice like I'm going to be at sea for a week and anything could happen. 1 night at sea, because it would dock in Charleston, and that it was so advanced and so luxurious and so elegant that it could sail fast enough that you were only at sea for 1 night and only off the coast 30 miles.
Right.
And so it was this kind
of, right? It's only 30 miles, but of course that's.
Well, you can't get, who can swim 30 miles? Not me, not you, not the people on the ship. And when it explodes, what's crazy is they knew steamship travel was not that safe. There were 4 lifeboats on the ship with over 200 people. 4 lifeboats. Right. And 2 weren't seaworthy.
So exciting. Clearly something exciting is going to happen.
And then everything.
So research is a really big part of your process. Do you like it? I mean, do you?
I love it.
You like it. Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah, when I wrote Becoming Mrs. Lewis, I didn't realize that I wrote that book because I needed to write that book. I couldn't not write that book. And when I met you, I told you about it. You were one of maybe 3 people in the world who knew I was writing it. And I didn't realize that what I was doing was starting a whole new genre. What I didn't realize was, because I wasn't trying to do that, I just wanted to write this story. But as you know, I used to be a nurse. And when I was a nurse, I was a research nurse. And I love research. I love finding that one fact that changes everything, that changes the story, that changes our perspective, that changes what we think about the world, that changes what we think we already know. So right after that, I knew that's what I'd be doing. And this story took a lot more research than I had expected. And that's okay, because I learned so much. It's been an over 3-year journey writing this book, and I have learned an incredible amount, and I'm so grateful to it for the rabbit holes I have fallen down. But I love the research. I think it's as important as the actual writing for me, like feeding my soul.
So what you're talking about, that moment where something turns, some surprise, something you could never have predicted, even when you were in the book and you had the idea. What was that for this book?
Oh, so for this book, what it was I was trying to decide what family to tell the story about. And you and I talk about this a lot, and you have it with your books. What's the door into the story, right? And I remember talking a lot about it with Love and Ruin too, about where you start, how you enter that door into the story. And I couldn't find it with this book. And I was really frustrated. And did my sound suddenly go out?
I hear you perfectly well. I suppose
It did. Hold on one second. My sound coming in went out because give me a second. It picked up my AirPods for some reason. Okay, I'm back. So I was doing this research on this family, and I discovered that there was this 15-year-old boy who had survived the wreck with this family. And during the wreck, during 5 days and 5 nights, he had earned himself a nickname. And that nickname was the Noble Boy. And then 20 years later, he had a new nickname, and it was the Red Devil. And it threw into question for me this whole meant to be, destiny, fate, who survives. And if you survive, that merits some kind of worthiness. And if you survived and are given a second chance in life, you want to pay it back and do something good with your life. Because what he did is he survived and he became a slave trader. He brought in the penultimate, and some say the last, slave ship called the Wanderer, 400 enslaved people from the Congo to Jekyll Island. And he rabble-roused for the Civil War. He had a terrible reputation, and yet he was spared, and his siblings weren't. Mm-hmm. And he survived, and I knew that's what the story was about. I knew that this was about not just surviving, but what we do with that surviving.
What we do with our lives afterwards, right? And it's not that we've been given this precious gift and so we'll go on and do this incredible thing. When he was the noble boy, was he truly the noble boy, or did he have the seed of the Red Devil? I mean,
that is what I wanted to ask. And I've asked a lot of people who have read family papers and things like that. And they said that he went on to have businesses, terrible businesses. He cheated, and he had a terrible reputation, but he never once in any of his correspondence, he never once again mentioned the Pulaski or that he survived it, or that he lost, I'm not going to tell you how many, X number of family members on it. He just became he chose survival to do worse things with his life instead of better. And if he wasn't truly noble, he was at least just a 15-year-old boy who was trying to do the right thing,
right,
and help people and
Right.
he gave up his drop of water and his drop, and he was the oldest of 6 siblings of a really wonderful family. And then he shifted, and that threw into question, if we survive, we definitely go do something better with our lives, right? We're given a second chance.
Mhm.
So that was the kind of twist that said,
Right.
that's what the story's about.
That's the door in. Yeah.
Mhm.
Fascinating. Were you tempted at any point to write about the literal family, or did you know from the beginning that you were going to fictionalize?
Oh, wow. Nobody's ever asked me that. Um, I think I always knew I would fictionalize them because I didn't want this to be a biography of the Gazaway Bug Lamar family. I wanted this to be, I mean, can you even make up that name?
Oh, I know. I was going to say
Gazaway Bug Lamar.
goofy.
I know, you can't even make that up. So I knew I didn't want this to be some Savannah history lesson about a very famous family. I knew I wanted this to be about survival and surviving the surviving and trauma and who we become, and making bigger choices about thriving versus surviving. And if I made it biographical, it was a different kind of story.
Right. And then there are always limitations, right? There's a ceiling, and we can't always sort of pursue.
Yeah, and Paula, that
what-
ceiling too had to do with, it's 1838,
Yeah.
right? Like most of the women we've written about have been of our century. This is a century where, I mean, I had some written accounts from them, but their life was, we're on the ship most of the time. So their life required an entirely different dimension of research and understanding if I go to the plantations or the in-houses or any of that. And I didn't want it to be that kind of biography.
Right. No, that makes sense. So one of my favorite characters in the novel is the shipwreck hunter, who earlier I called him Crocodile Dundee to you. His name is Maddox in the novel, who's I don't know. I just find him sort of heartthrobby and fascinating. But in real life, you actually met a shipwreck hunter who had a big impact on the book. So tell us that story.
Yeah. So Maddox Wagner and Micah Eldred are like, they could not be more different. And Micah Eldred is the real shipwreck hunter, and he is the financier of this company called Endurance Exploration. And he is fascinating. And the minute I found out the ship had been found, I know he thought I was crazy. He might still think I'm crazy. I emailed and called him until he finally answered me, because I knew that part of the story was just as important as the explosion and the survival. This fascinating idea that we go looking for what's lost, that we dive to the bottom of yes, some of it's for treasure, but it's not just about that, right? It's about finding what is lost. It's about the mythology of the sea. So when I interviewed him about it and got to talking to him, one of the things he said to me was, a lot of times what we find is that when we start to bring up the artifacts and look at the bottom of the ocean, it's not the same narrative. We find out something completely different happened that night. It didn't blow up, or that didn't happen with this ship, but it happens a lot that when they find the remains, they find that the story isn't what's always been told. And I loved that.
Like the actual historical account, or what's known, or what was in the newspaper, or what was reported by the families, etc.
Yes.
Right? Interesting.
Yep.
And in this case, was there a twist?
No, there's no twist with the Pulaski. It was pretty straightforward. The boiler blew up, it sank. What's fascinating is how much time it's taking them to find the treasure, and there is a lot of treasure on that ship. They've only found 5% of it. But the ship, so this is the ship, the starboard side blew and it broke in half. I'm going to have to get like a ship thing, but I know, right? And it broke in half, and like the Titanic, it went like that. The bow went this way, the aft went this way. And it dropped a whole bunch right away, but it took 45 minutes to sink. And so it was floating the whole 45 minutes. So there is a trail of treasure and artifacts at the bottom of the ocean. It's going to take them years to find it all.
How long had they been looking before they?
They had been looking for a couple years, and they have this complicated system of, so we know it was between here and here, and then looking up where the tides were that night, where the currents were. There was a storm that blew up, as you know, the next night, and it took them a while to find it. And then when they find it, they're never sure. And I put it in the book, but I think it's really fascinating. When they find a wreck, they're usually sure, but they can't say until they find something with the ship's name on it. And for this ship, it was a candlestick.
Yeah. Now you've seen some of this. Do you want to tell us any stories?
I do. So we were talking earlier about how sometimes we get a little confirmation, right? If we keep our antenna up a little, don't go this way, go that way.
Signposts,
breadcrumbs, signposts. And one of the things that happened, besides finding it when I was a few weeks into writing about it, is that as we've talked about, I chose to write about one woman. Her name is Augusta Longstreet in the novel, but she has a very real name. Her name was Rebecca Lamar. And Rebecca Lamar left behind, she survives. I don't try to keep that a secret. She survives, and she writes this pages account in tight script handwriting that I found in the Georgia Historical Society. She recounts the night and what happened, 5 days and 5 nights at sea. And I decided to focus on her. I decided to honor her. And she is Charlie Lamar, the boy we were talking about. She is his aunt. Yeah. And so we see it from her point of view. And 2 years into writing this story, when I was the most frustrated, they found her luggage tag.
Oh, wow.
They didn't find anybody else's luggage tag. They don't have any other names. There is not they will eventually, but they have not found.
It was all for you.
They found it's about this big. It's about 2 inches by 3 inches. And in beautiful script on a brass nameplate, it says R. Lamar.
Beautiful. Yeah. Cool. Well, I have to say that, I mean, besides, of course, it's an exciting story to tell, what happens to who lives, who dies, and if they live, how do they survive? And, but I was actually really moved by the women in the book and the deep bonds that they form and how that their relationships actually transform their lives, that they make certain choices and prioritize relationships over, for instance, relationships with men. And I just wondered if that's a theme that you find running through other books of yours, or did this sort of grow organically out of this novel?
I think maybe it grew out of not my novels, but my life.
Yeah.
I think that, gosh, I'm going to get a little choked up. The profound trusting relationships that you make with other women who have your back, and who know the hard things and the hard parts, and keep what's sacred, and those kinds of things. I think I really wanted to show that and play that out between not only the modern day character who loses that person in her life, but between the historical characters who are trying to support each other and get torn apart by this explosion and can't find each other. And so not only what those women mean to each other, but then what happens when they're torn apart, and how does that affect, and how they can bring it back together.
Right. Well, I thought you did it really beautifully. But let's talk about Everly for a minute, your contemporary character who begins the book by recounting a story for us, a childhood memory. So the Pulaski is something that is monumental in her life as a symbol well before the ship is found and she gets wrapped up in the discovery and this museum where she has to curate the collection of the things that are brought up from the sea that you fictionalize. So tell us about her. Tell us about how that's the beginning of the book, how that came to you, and basically your understanding of Everly as a character.
So the beginning of this book was hard for me. We talked about, how do I walk into this story? And I knew from the beginning that part of the allure of this story, the allure of any shipwreck kind of mythology of Savannah, because the city of Savannah and its mythology is a big part of this book too. And so I knew the lore of that, the mythology, the stories. This is the reason people come to the city. They want to hear shipwreck stories. They want to hear about how the city was founded. And so I knew I wanted storytelling to be a really integral part of it, because I wanted the idea that the mythology of our lives and our families and the mythology of our origins and where we came from, as well as the city, the mythology of the city and the origins of the city, as well as personal. So my book completely broke free when the opening line came to me. And it was from Everly. And she says, "I was born in water." And I just even get chills saying that. And then like that was it. I needed to know her origin story. And then we immediately see that her family was, as she says, the Winthrops are very big on stories and legends. And because she's a Winthrop. And this whole idea of where they came from and who their family was, but also the city. And so her grandfather used to tell her about the Pulaski. And he used to tell her about one very specific passenger on the Pulaski who was never accounted for in the deceased or in the survivors. And some people say they saw her. Some people said they never saw her again. And he would tell these stories and he would always give Lily a different ending. Sometimes they found her. Sometimes a mermaid saved her. Sometimes she returned. And I loved the idea that to make sense of the world and to make sense of something we don't understand, we just keep making up new stories about it. And I wanted it to start that way.
Yeah. So we just have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Okay.
I'm interested about Savannah, about your relationship with Savannah and how, it's wonderful what you've done, how much of Savannah's history. And of course it's a storied city that with a lot of allure, it has a lot of allure. And so tell me about that, about how Savannah grew to become.
So I love Savannah. You've been here with me. I have a place that's about 25 minutes from Savannah. Rivers, I'm obsessed with rivers. Anybody who follows my social media or knows me, I'm a wee bit obsessed with rivers and dolphins, that too. But my daughter went to school at Savannah College of Art and Design. So Savannah has always been very fascinating to me. And yet I didn't know as much about it as I thought I did once I started my research. And what I learned and what I discovered, because this was a very boots on the ground kind of book, a lot of research, boots on the ground, is the fascinating museums in Savannah. The museums in Savannah and in Atlanta, which is why I always come to the History Center, between the Georgia Historical Society and the Ships of the Sea Museum and the Telfair Museums, this book would be nothing what it is right now without those museums. The people I interviewed, the storytelling, visual storytelling you see in museums, it changed everything. So if you want to know Savannah, go to the museums.
That's such a resource.
Yeah.
So I think it was 12 books that you'd written before you wrote Becoming Mrs. Lewis.
Yeah.
And since then, it seems have made a kind of shift away from contemporary women's fiction, or what we might even call Southern women's fiction. So what happened to you? Not, I know how the idea came to you, but what happened to you after you began writing that story? I mean, do you think you're changed as a writer in this genre? Did it sort of crack you open in some way that is palpable to you?
That's a great question. And I think you've probably watched it. It has cracked me open. And it has, how would I even describe? Here's how I would describe it. I feel like I came home to writing this kind of fiction. Look, you keep making me like get choked up. Like I feel
Barbara Walters.
I love all my books. I love my contemporary books. And I love talking about them. But I feel that there was this journey, and I walked through that door, and there's this landscape of untold stories just shimmering everywhere, these little sparkling lights of untold stories that have been, I know it sounds crazy to say, but I think you'll agree with me, that have been waiting to be told.
Yeah. There's something too about finding something that wants to come to life and then feeling yourself come to life
Yes.
in the telling.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm.
It opens up new places inside of you. Yes.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a beautiful story. And like I said, just congratulations. So the book comes out tomorrow, Surviving Savannah. And I know here comes Claire, who will moderate the Q&A.
Well, wait, before she moderates, I have something to say. Paula, I need to tell everyone, Paula's book comes out April 13th. It's called When the Stars Go Dark.
Thank you.
I'm not kidding. It's extraordinary. It is blow your mind extraordinary. So go pre-order it. Go get ready. I'm telling you. Okay, Claire, sorry.
Thanks, yeah.
No, all good. Thank you both so much for such a lovely conversation. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to do my best to kind of make them all fit into the little bit of time we have left. So the first kind of topic, we have a lot of questions just asking about some specific details about the research that you did, Patti. So first of all, can you say, you mentioned some information about how they're still uncovering artifacts and treasure and other things. Can you say a little bit more about what is meant by treasure and how many artifacts-ish have they found so far?
So when I say treasure, I mean gold and silver. So in 1838, everybody traveled with their money because there's no paper money and of course, no credit cards. And if you were heading north for the summer and you were going to be gone for months, you took a trunk of gold and silver. And America hadn't quite caught up to making its own money yet. We were a very brand new country. And so there were a lot of Spanish doubloons and a lot of silver and things like that people used for payment. And a lot of people were traveling for business or to go buy land or cotton gins or whatever it might be. And they would carry entire trunks of gold and silver. So that's what I mean by treasure. When I say artifacts, there are pocket watches, jewelry, candlesticks, religious icons, name it, anything people would travel with that would sustain being at the bottom of the ocean for 184 years. So, for example, a candlestick that would have a family name on it. There was some silver that was found all together in a big pile. It didn't move for 184 years. It was still sitting together in a pile like a family. And it was from one family. It had a monogram on it, CEK. And I became obsessed with finding out who that silver belonged to. And it took me 2 years, but I figured it out. It belonged to a woman named Caroline Eliza Coy Keith. And it took me a long time to find it, and it's not even in the book, but half a paragraph, but it mattered. So those kinds of things are what I mean by treasure and artifacts.
That's so fascinating. It's such a different world to think about when you would have been hauling around, all the valuables you own from state to state. So a couple more questions about, the ship. So for the luggage tag that you mentioned, were you able to see that in person?
Yes, I was. It's that and a pocket watch I have been able to hold. And I'm telling you, when I held the pocket watch, it felt like it was vibrating. Nobody wore watches. Men wore pocket watches on Albert chains, which are those gold chains that you see. Those were called Albert chains. And I held one of the pocket watches they found. And I'm telling you, it was like, bzzz. But the most, I got, a little kerplunked or whatever when I saw the luggage tag. I couldn't hold it because they have it in a case and they have it, protected. But yes, I have seen them.
That's great. And during your research, did you have the opportunity to go and see the site where the ship sunk? And when they were looking for the ship, I know you mentioned that they only know what ship they found, where they actually find something that has the name on it. Were they looking specifically for that ship, or did they just happen upon it while looking for something else?
Oh, no, they were specifically looking for this ship. They knew that there was a great amount of money on this ship. That people traveling north for summer took all their silver, all their gold, all their china, they knew there was, I don't know, if you're a pirate, I guess it'd be booty. They knew there was a great amount of booty on this boat. And so they were specifically looking for the Pulaski when they found it.
For the booty.
The booty. Yep.
To that point,
I bet they would just kill me for saying that, but I hope the shipwreck people aren't watching.
Laurie asked a really interesting question. When these type of items are found, and if they can be identified to whom they belong to, do the heirs get that property back?
That's a complicated question. I probably need to bring Micah on to answer, but on the whole, no, unless you can really prove it belongs to an ancestor. If a pocket watch came back and it had your great, this is almost 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a thing that shipwreck salvaging companies, it's called admirability. When you find something, you immediately file that you found it and they own it. Now, if I could walk up and say, I can prove that is my great, because it's like 6 generations now, grandfather's pocket watch, you might be able to get it, but no.
Very interesting. So we have a few more kind of questions about the history of the ship. I'm going to move to your book more specifically. We have a lot of questions about the title. So always the question, did you have the title when you first started writing the book, or is it something that came to you as you were working?
Oh, poor Paul. Do you remember just during COVID being on the phone for an hour with me about the title?
Titles, yeah. This title in particular, which I always loved. I always thought this was the title. So
yeah, it was the working title. It was the title I always had. And I don't know why I always feel like I need to go around in a circle to come back to where I started, but I sure did. Went round and round and round and round and round. And I think the reason that I did is that I didn't want it to sound like it was about a person. And I was afraid Surviving Savannah made it sound like it was about a person. But in the end, it was the exact right title. In which I'm just going to flip it for a second. Was When the Stars Go Dark, was that always your title?
No.
Okay.
Always my title. I want to know, like, in terms of the title though, how does Savannah, the place, need to be survived?
So it was both. And that's why I ended up keeping it, is because it wasn't just about surviving the shipwreck, and it wasn't just about surviving the surviving. It was about surviving the place and the mythology of where you're from.
Mm-hmm.
So Everly didn't just have to live through the death of her best friend who was standing next to her. She also had to come to terms with this mythology about her family and her life in her city.
Right. The origin story.
Yeah, the origin stories that we all have, that we have to look closely at. Yeah.
Great. So this is a question for both of you. So since you both write historical fiction, Christine was curious if you could, or sorry, that wasn't, where did it go? I lost the question, but I can't remember who asked the question, but it was a good one. But it was for both of y'all's research process. Can you talk a little bit about how you both approach it and about how long it typically takes you?
You go first, Paula. I've been talking a lot.
No, you've been talking wonderfully. So research for me is, I have to say, it's an intuitive process. So I'll find that threshold moment or detail or the twist, as Patti says, the thing that's going to get me into the story. Or I'll have just the idea for the story. And then the research, the moment I have the idea, the day I have an idea, I usually start writing while I still have that energy. The energy of making is the energy of invention. And then I read like hell to catch up to myself because I sometimes don't know what I'll need to know. About, for instance, about Paris in the 1920s, about bullfighting, about whatever, any of those things, about what it was like to be a racehorse trainer in Africa, And so I at least catch up to myself. There are writers who will do years of research before they ever sit down, and writers too who have note cards, who have this incredibly organized system, who keep quotes and things. And I'm not that person. I happen to know Patti is not that person
I was going to say she answered for me.
either. No.
Yeah. I my research is similar. The minute I'm curious about something or fascinated about something, I'm already writing. You probably will never see that writing, but I am writing, and I try not to. Of course, it happens sometimes, but fall down a research rabbit hole just to have facts or cards. I don't use note cards. I did draw the ship, what happened, because it was really confusing to me. I'm a very visual. And so starboard, bow, aft, I did draw myself. It'd be funny to show it to you. I have it here. And it had all these little labels, like I have a little explosion where it exploded. But on the whole, I keep writing. And then if I hit a wall, I'll dig a little deeper, keep writing, hit a wall, dig a little deeper.
So both of you have been working on projects during COVID. Were both of you through the research process by that point, or do you have any tips? The question is, do you have any tips for tackling research, especially when, as it is right now, travel is very limited?
Well, I was through the research process, but I'll tell you, COVID definitely changed all kinds of things about my routine and places limitations. I have kids at home, for instance, who are home. And so, that magical moment when they go to school, like that doesn't happen the same way. So, mom can't concentrate also in the same way. But, there is so much, thank goodness, with the internet. When I was researching The Paris Wife, I couldn't afford to go to Paris. And so I did a lot on Google Earth. I know it sounds ridiculous, and Ernest Hemingway would turn over in his grave to know that I would place Hadley on a street corner and walk her down to the Seine or whatever on Google Earth to imagine what she was.
I do it.
But we do what we can do, right? And then there's the place where the research is always going to let you down, and you have to plunge forward with your imagination anyway.
Yeah. Yes, this book was done when COVID started. So I had already done my boots on the ground in Savannah, and I'd already visited the museums and done my interviews. But the projects that I've been working on during COVID, yeah, I can't go visit. I can't go see it. I have a book coming out in October that took place partially in England and in a small town called Worcestershire, which I've never been to and never visited and looked at on Google Earth. So, I did what I could, but there is something about boots on ground, but there's something about button chair and getting it done too. So a little bit of both.
Great. And if you had to pick just one thing, what would be the most interesting thing that you uncovered during the process of research for this book?
What would be the most interesting thing I uncovered? Um, I mean, I think I'm going to repeat myself, but I think one of the most interesting things for me was discovering the absolute fascination of the visual storytelling of the museums. I've always appreciated them, but not like I did in this.
What does
I
visual storytelling mean, though? Just because I don't exactly know what you mean when you say that.
So, for example, the Owens Thomas house in the Thomas Owens house in Owens Thomas house in Savannah is this gorgeous, it's one of the Telfair museums, and you can go visit and see what their lives were like in 1838, what their bedrooms look like, what their dining rooms look like, what their kitchens look like. But at the same time, what the fascinating thing and wonderful thing they did is instead of covering it up or making it more attractive, they redid the slave quarters. So visually, I can see how the slaves lived. Well, the fairy tale part that we all see in the big house that we go tour, the slave quarters have been completely refurbished to be exactly what, or as close as can be to what it would have been like in 1838. So that visual story to me makes everything come alive. The ship, the Pulaski ship, there is a to scale model of it in the Ships of the Sea Maritime Museum. I can go look at the ship where they would have walked across this bow and down to this stairwell. And that visual for me in these museums made everything come alive in a different way.
Thank you for that, Patti. That was really great. I know that, at the History Center, that's such an important thing, for visitors to be able to actually stand in these places and see around them what it was actually like. It's so much more powerful sometimes
It is.
Than other methods. So we only have time for a couple more questions, and we had a lot of questions tonight. So I'm sorry if I couldn't get to everyone's. So the question that all of us are eager to know is from Ed. And he wants to know, he says, the historical event, your novel, sounds as if it should have been a movie. So, Savannah's been a hot spot for many TV specials and movie settings. So do you know, is there any movie under consideration, or, a movie about this event that we should know about?
I wish. Want to put that out there for me? Ed, you got somebody you can call? No, there's no movie in the works. I know people are trying, but no, I wish there was. I think it would be a fascinating movie, especially with the history of Savannah and the South kind of tangled into this story. I think it would make a great movie.
Yeah.
But I'm not in charge of movies, so.
Well, we'll cross our fingers.
Yeah.
A question for Paula. So Christine says, first of all, your books are amazing. And she was wondering if you're going to be writing any more about Hemingway's wives, because we know there are a lot of them.
There are a lot of them. There are several dozen. No, I think
there are several dozen.
I think not. What happened to me when I skipped a wife, it's true. I did. I wrote about the first wife and the Paris wife, and then I wrote about the third wife in Love and Ruin. First of all, it was a total accident that I would ever write another Hemingway novel. I would have sworn on my children's lives that I, would never tackle him as a subject again, and until I was taken over by an idea. And it's when the idea comes and it insists on itself, and it sort of takes you down the rabbit hole. But with Love and Ruin, which is told from the point of view of Martha Gellhorn, Hemingway's third wife, in that book, I really felt like I was able to kind of visit all of the wives. So because when Ernest meets Marty, he's married to Pauline. And then by the time the novel ends, and their marriage ends in this disastrous way, he's already moved on to the fourth wife, Mary. And so in a way, Love and Ruin kind of bridges all of that. It's one-stop shopping. You have all the wives, and Hadley appears in letters, and Bumby's there. Hemingway's son, who's also in The Paris Wife. And no, I don't believe that I will. And I know that that's will disappoint people, but it's true.
Well, we have just, I'm going to try and condense a few more of the questions we have here tonight. So a few more questions about the ship. This is a good one. Was this the maiden voyage of this ship? And if not, how many times do you know how many times it had safely made this passage before this just absolute disastrous occurrence?
Yes, it was the fourth journey. Simple. Yeah, it was
Yes.
it was not the maiden voyage. It was the fourth journey. Now the ship had done some other things, and then they'd refurbished it for this purpose and made it an elegant travel ship. But this was its fourth back and forth to Baltimore.
Mm. And two more questions for both of you. Who are your favorite authors to read / who are you reading right now?
That's so hard.
It is.
Just quick question at the end for two authors.
I know, right?
This thing happens where, you
You fuzz out.
I know everything you read, but I recently have been reading, and I wouldn't say this is my favorite author, but have discovered a book that has really been important to me, both during COVID and through the winter. Patti has a much different winter than I do in Cleveland, but there's a book by Catherine May called Wintering, which is about surviving the season of winter, the physical season of winter, but also that there are moments in our lives that come as a season where we need to retreat from the world and recover something about ourselves. And I have to say, that was really deeply beautiful book and just kind of the thing I needed to read recently. Yeah.
I haven't read it yet, Paula, but I listened to that interview with her on Being.
I know you told me about it. Yeah, it's it's actually just really lovely. And it's the kind of book where you kind of want to linger over every sentence.
Yeah, she read some stuff out loud on that interview, and I was like, I've got to get that book. Yeah, it was amazing.
What are you reading, Patti?
I mean, for the past 2 weeks, whenever an interviewer asks me what I'm reading, I'm just going to keep saying it and be annoying, but it's Paula McLain's When the Stars Go Dark. And I know that it's a tiny bit of a genre shift, but for those of you who don't know, you know her from her amazing novels, but Paula is a poet, and her writing is just what I aspire. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So last question. Ron says that you are two of his favorite humans.
Hi, Ron. You're our
Hi, Ron. He's our
And he would
librarian friend, our Cleveland librarian friend, and we adore
Oh,
him.
that's so great. I'm so glad he could join us tonight. That is the fun part about virtual events, is you can have,
It's
people.
true. It can bring people together that you would have. Does Ron have a question, or he just wanted to send his love?
Ron's question is, would the two of you ever consider writing something together?
We've talked about it.
would be so fun. We have talked about it. That's all we're going to say about that.
I would just say we have talked about writing a nonfiction book, more closer to memoir together, because as we've become friends and we are both kind of like oversharers, when you find an intimate relationship. And it's one thing that I really liked about this book is the intimacy between women, real intimacy, that you actually share all your stuff and the stuff that's kind of hard to look at sometimes, but then that's how friendships develop. And anyway, we've talked about writing a book like that, which would, I think monumentally overexpose us as humans, but it might.
But at the same time would be extraordinary. So yes.
Yeah.